Hey everybody, welcome back to the TypeScript Game Engine tutorial series. This is video 17 in the series. So today we're going to actually focus on input, and we're going to be adding some various things to our engine to allow some user input, because right now we don't have that, and it would be nice to be able to actually to have some of that type of input. So what we're going to do for right now is we're going to put in some keyboard input. And then after that, we'll put in some mouse input to capture mouse input events. So let's go ahead and jump into that. I'm just going to actually close. I'm going to close all these things. Okay, so what we're going to do is start by under core. We're going to add a new folder. We're going to call this input. And we're going to create a TypeScript file, and we're going to call this input manager. And we're going to say namespace TSE. And we're going to export class input manager. Okay. And we're going to have a public static initialize, return type void. And here's where we're going to actually tie into some of our events that we'll be listening for. But before we move on to that, we need a couple of things to track privately. So first off, we need a private, we'll call this underscore keys. It's going to be a Boolean array, and we'll set that to an empty array. And then let's actually make this private static. And then we're also going to have a public static is key down. It's going to be return type void. And the next thing that we're going to need outside of our class input manager is export enumeration, and we're going to call this keys. And right now we're just going to want to define a couple of keys. These are going to be keys on the keyboard. Alright, so what we're going to say is left equals 37. That's the keyboard key code for the left arrow key on your keyboard. We're going to say up equals 38. Right equals 39. And down equals 40. Okay, and we'll probably be adding to this as we continue. But for right now, we just need those keys. Okay, and back in our is key down, we're going to say key type keys. Oops. Okay, so in our initialize, we're going to say for let I equals 0, I is less than 255. Oops, 255. And then plus plus I. So basically what we're going to do is set the default state for all the keys. So we're going to say input manager keys I equals false. So we're going to fill out the entire array of keys to false. So basically what this means is whenever we press a key down on the keyboard, it's going to get set to true. Whenever a key is released or not currently being pressed, it's going to be false. So we're going to default everything to false, and then as a key gets pushed down, we're going to set it to true. Okay, so in our is key down check, we're going to say input manager.keys, and then we just pass in key, and we return that. So we just simply check the state of the key in our is key down. And this needs to be return type Boolean, not void. Okay, so the next thing that we need is something to capture our actual key press event. So in here we need a private static on key down, and it's going to take a event, keyboard event, return type void, and we want to say input so we want to say input manager keys, and then we'll say event dot keycode equals true. Okay, and then we're going to make a copy of this method, and we're going to say on key up, and we're just going to set this to false. Okay, so back in our initialize, we want to say window dot add event listener key down, and then for the event we want to say input manager dot on key down. Okay. One more thing. This should probably actually return Boolean, because we don't want these actions going any further than this, so there's actually a couple more things that we need to do. So first off, we can just say event.prevent default, and then event dot stop propagation, and then return false. So this is sort of a cross-browser way to just say, don't allow this event to be handled by anything else. We've handled it. Don't bubble it up. Okay? So I'm just going to copy this line for key down and change it to key up on key up. Okay. So now we have a nice input manager class that we can check as to whether our keys are currently being pressed or what's going on with those things. So back in our engine, in our start method, right after our asset manager, but before the zone manager, we're going to say input manager.initialize, just so that it gets called and set up. Okay. And what we're actually going to do is we're going to create a keyboard move behavior, and we're going to attach it in configuration to our duck object and move it when we press the keys on the keyboard. So quickest way to create one of these behaviors is I'm actually just going to copy rotation behavior, and I'm going to create a new TypeScript file, and we're going to call this keyboard movement behavior. Okay, and this is just a quick example behavior. We may wind up using this later on, maybe not, but it'll serve as a good example of some of the behaviors that you can create. So we'll say keyboard movement behavior data. We'll just say rotation movement build behavior builder and keyboard movement behavior, right? Okay, and we'll just change the data class over. And in this case, our data doesn't actually contain anything other than the name. So we can get rid of this rotation. Let's change these classes over to be correct. Okay, and we're going to say the behavior type is keyboard movement, and we're actually just going to get rid of that. And instead of the transform rotation being added, what we want to say is if input manager dot is key down keys dot left, then we want to say this owner transform dot position dot x minus equals 0.1. Right? So we just want to move to the left if the left key is held down. And I'm actually just going to copy this and say if keys.right, we're going to plus 0.1. So we'll move it to the right, and then I'm actually going to copy these two, change this one to up, and this one to down, and change these to the y-axis. I might have those backwards, but that should work. Okay. So, now in configuration, I'm actually going to add a behavior. So we want to say behaviors. Okay. And in that one, we actually just want to say name, movement, behavior, and for type, we just want to say keyboard movement. And that's all that we should really have to do to support what we need there. So let me just rebuild this. Let's see. Oops, I forgot to change this. To reflect the correct builder. Okay. And there we go. Now, as you can see, that's actually kind of slow, but it does move around. Let's actually, you know what? Let's add a configuration property to this. Let's add the movement speed. So public speed number, and we'll default that to 1 in the behavior data. And we'll say if the JSON speed is not equal to undefined, then this.speed equals number JSON.speed. Okay. Actually, we'll set that to 0.1 so that we can see that we're not using that default value that we hard-coded before. Okay. Let's set. Let's also create. Actually, I'm just going to copy this property here. So in the behavior itself, I'm also defaulting the speed to 1. And in the constructor, I'm going to say this.speed equals data.speed. Okay, and then I'm actually going to just replace the 0.1s with the speed. And then rebuild that. In configuration, I'm going to add a property called speed, and I'm going to set it to, say, 2.5. Okay. All right, let's just force reload this. My keyboard controls actually making it difficult for me to hard reload. So I'm going to have to probably change that. But as you can see, I'm actually pressing the keys on my keyboard right now, but I'm able to move our duck around the screen. So that is really it for the keyboard input. One last thing that I want to do is I want to set up some sort of mouse input. So let's go ahead and add that real quick. So we're going to create a private static on mouse move, and its event is going to be a mouse event, and that I believe is going to be a return type void. And we're also going to want to have a private static mouse x number, private static mouse y number, and then we're also going to want to keep previous. So I'm going to change these two to previous. Okay, so now I can say window.add event listener mouse move, and we're going to say input manager, oops, .add mouse move. So we're going to capture the mouse movements. So the first thing we'll do is we'll say this dot mouse input manager dot previous mouse x equals input manager dot mouse x, and actually just going to copy that and do the same for y. So I want to copy off the old positions first, and then say input manager dot mouse x equals event dot client x, and I'm just going to copy this for y. Okay, and I'm going to make a couple of accessors here. So I'm going to say public static get mouse position. It's going to return a vector 2. Return new vector 2. This dot mouse x. This dot mouse y. Okay. And we may or may not want to do this as a vector 2. For now I'm just doing it for convenience. We might want to split that up to just use numbers for speed later on. But yeah, that's fine. Now, previous mouse X and previous mouse Y, I'm not really going to implement at the moment. We will bring that up if needed later on. I just want to add this in here so that if we need to get the current mouse coordinates, we can do that. The next thing I want to do is add mouse down and mouse up. So I'm going to say private static on mouse down event mouse event return type void. Okay, and I need a couple more trackers, so I'll say private static left down boolean equals false. And I'm actually just going to copy this, paste it, and change that to right down. So these will track if the left or right mouse buttons are down. So I can say this dot left down. Whoops. So here I actually need to check to see which mouse button is being clicked. So if event dot button is 0, then this dot left down equals true. Else if this dot event dot button equals 2, this dot right down equals true. And so you might be wondering why 0, why 2. So the buttons are actually defined in numerical order from left to right. So if you look at your mouse, most mice these days actually have a mouse wheel on them, and most of them are actually clickable. You can click down on that. And so your left would be 0, your mouse wheel click, not the scroll, but the click would be 1, and then your right mouse button would be 2. So we're not actually going to take in the mouse wheel clicks into account here. We're not. If we could always add that later, but we're not going to take that into account. So I'm not going to worry about that here. All right. So we need a mouse up as well, which is basically the same function with a few modifications. Instead of trues, we just flip these to falses after renaming the function. That's it. And so up here we can say window dot add event listener, mouse down, input manager dot mouse on, mouse down. Okay, and I'm actually just going to copy this and paste it. Change this down to up. Change this down to up. And now mouse down and mouse up are connected as well. So in this case, what I actually want to do is many times we want the mouse events to fire off a message. We want to be able to listen to that from somewhere else in the system. And so I'm not going to do that necessarily for the mouse move, although we could do that as well. But the mouse down, definitely, we should be doing that. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to define a context that's going to be used elsewhere to read that mouse event. So I'm going to export a class called mouse context, and it is going to contain a public left down boolean. It is going to contain a public right down boolean. It is going to contain a public vector, public position vector 2. Okay, and then it's also going to provide a constructor. We'll say left down bool right down boolean and position vector 2. Okay. Now I can say this dot left down equals left down. This dot right down equals right down. And this dot position equals position. Okay, so for each of these, we actually want to say message.send mouse up, and then I can send, the sender is this, and then the context is going to be a new mouse context, and it's going to say input manager dot left down, input manager right down, input manager get mouse position, just as a convenience. I'm going to copy this and paste it at the bottom of mouse down and just change this to mouse down. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this mouse up, and I'm going to subscribe to this at the engine level. So at the engine, I'm going to say implements iMessage handler. And we're going to go ahead and implement that interface. I'm just going to paste that there for a second and copy this. Cut that. I'm actually going to paste this right here. Change this to public. Okay. And in the constructor, I want to say, actually not in the constructor. Let's say in start, after zone manager dot initialize, I want to say message dot subscribe, and I want to say mouse up, and the handler is going to be this. Okay, and then in the on message, if message dot code equals mouse up. Okay, so in here we're going to say let context equals message.context as mouse context. And we're going to say document.title equals, and we're going to use an interpolated string here. We're just going to say position, put some brackets there, and we're going to say $, and in between braces we're going to say context.position.x, and I'm actually going to copy this whole thing, put a comma and paste it, and change the second one to y. So anytime the mouse up event occurs, the title of our document will change. So let's go ahead and run that. Okay. And I'm holding the mouse down now, nothing's happening. Release the mouse, and now we have our position where I release the mouse. And just to prove that this works, this number should be very small here and very large over here. Great. So it's not a whole lot of fanciness going on with our input yet, but at least we have some hooks into the input system so that we can use this input later on when we're actually starting to make our game. So that's where I'm going to end this video. There's not a whole lot to this yet. We'll need to extend this system later, but I just wanted to get the basics in for now. Thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you learned. If you haven't already, consider subscribing, and I will see you guys in the next video.